Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us virtually for our distinguished panel as we discuss the topic, Innovation in a Growing Agriculture and Agri-Food Sector. My name is PJ Joshi, and I'm an editor in charge of trade and agriculture coverage at Politico. Politico last year also launched Politico Canada, where we cover policy and politics out of Ottawa, and I'd helped launch that section, so I'm very familiar with issues to the north of the border as well. Before joining Politico 3 years ago, I was an editor at the New York Times and reported on various business issues for various publications. Let me now turn to our stellar panel. I'm going to let each panelist introduce him or herself as they answer this question. How do you think agriculture and the food sector held up in this pandemic? And let's start with Allison Sunstrom. Allison, what do you think?
Well, thank you, PJ. It's a privilege to join the discussion today. Like many of us on this panel, I wear multiple hats. I'm a repeat innovator, currently founder, CEO of CNSRV-X. We are developing blockchain and machine learning solutions in agriculture and carbon markets. I am a venture partner at Builders VC with offices in San Francisco and Calgary, and I'm an LP in the 51 investing in female-led digital startups. I'm also a founding partner and fellow at the Creative Destruction Lab. CDL is a global accelerator scaling science-based technologies massively. Over the past decade, PJ, I've started every presentation I make by stating that the world's farmers and ranchers face a monumental challenge. Over the next 25 years, we must double food production to feed 10 billion people with less labor. We must adopt more sustainable production methods, and we must adapt to climate change. I contend that we will only meet this challenge through disruptive innovation. But due to COVID-19, our future isn't what it once was. 93% of our world now lives in countries with closed borders and new entry limits. Resiliency has become as important as cost and efficiency in our supply chains, and in response, government policy will likely ensure resiliency and perhaps bring with it more oversight, higher taxes, less services, and more regulation. My hope is that alternatively, we seek more creative digital responses. Meaningful recovery should not just aim at recouping economic losses, but position our economies for success on the other side of the pandemic. COVID-19 has put us on a digital fast track. Farmers are going online. They are rapidly innovating, creating novel means of selling their products to keep themselves afloat. We are seeing the world become far more agile through the use of technology which connects us. A wide range of technologies, from genomics, biologics, to physical sensing and cognitive computing, and online commerce will increase food production, and we can respond to climate change. How we evolve as a global society coming out of the pandemic will have much to do with our digital strengths, our digital policies, and our investment in technology. Technology is transforming agriculture, and I think it's our key, PJ, to future food security.
Thank you so much for that insight. Let's now turn to Claudia Ressler. Claudia, how do you think that the food and agriculture sector functioned during this pandemic?
So first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me. It's great to be back in Canada, at least if it's virtually as well. I'm Claudia Ressler. I'm part of Microsoft's engineering team. Our team is responsible for building out an agriculture platform that's called FarmBeats that allows organization and tech providers to build out digital services, data analytics services for farmers. Microsoft has quite some investment also around digital skills and also around being able to bring connectivity to farming. And we also have an initiative that's driving innovation around artificial intelligence and machine learning in the agriculture space. I'm also, like Allison said, I'm wearing multiple hats. I'm on the board of a Canadian agriculture company, Ag Growth International, that's building ag equipment and has technology that's enabling the digital agriculture traceability from seed on the farm to the market, actually. So I want to respond to the pandemic a little bit in a way to say it's really the immediate impact I think we all saw as consumers as well. And that's like a supply chain that was significantly disrupted. And it starts from not seeing product and available in groceries. But, supply chains are in fact intentionally kept lean. So what we're seeing was not an unexpected event, but what we see in the long term was that this transparency to make decisions that would allow us to make more agile decisions in the supply chain is just not apparent. So we want to get to a more transparent system. We also saw sort of this demand shift from getting food from food services or restaurants going to the retail space and to consumer. That created a whole effect in terms of package sizes, packaging in general, which then again led to delay in the supply chain, but also to massive food waste. So those are really immediate impacts, which also brought some good innovation out of COVID-19, where we saw initial success in getting more farmer to consumer direct markets. And I think that's something we'll see substantially grow in the future. The other really big impact we saw is on labor and just being able to get food off farm. So being able to harvest, being able to bring labor into a country to help with being able to keep labor safe. So I think you will see in the long run, this needs to have an impact on more automation, more robotics that's coming to actual farming. And then the other effect we saw is really on the investment side, where in the beginning of COVID-19, it was almost like a standstill in investment. And my view would be mostly on the startup side, but like investors just waiting how this is all going to shape up. And what we're seeing right now is maybe a slight prioritization of food tech over ag tech, which, includes novel delivery systems, meal kits, and other things, which I think in a way is great. But truly what we want to see is this investment that's so urgently needed in the ag tech side to come back and help, supporting the industry. So overall, the other just effect that I think came out of COVID-19, and it's a really indirect effect, is this demand to have more transparency also to the consumer side. I think is it because people are buying products more in retail, but there is this advanced need of having more transparency of a sustainable footprint of a product and sort of just understanding where a product comes from. So you see, it's like coming in waves, but I think overall we saw some positive effects, but overall also a lot of things that need to be optimized in the future.
Thank you so much for that, Claudia. And now I'd like to turn to Ryan Bracken. Ryan, you have some interesting stories to tell about your company. Can you give us a little bit of insight about that and how it held up during the pandemic?
First of all, I'd like to thank the Toronto Global Forum organizers for inviting me to attend this panel discussion. Before I address the specific question, obviously I'd like to introduce myself and my business. So a brief introduction about Merit Functional Foods. We're a startup food ingredient manufacturer, having launched as a partnership between myself, two ex-hemp food entrepreneurs based here in Manitoba, as well as a company called Bracken NutriScience, which is a leader in plant-based food technology development. We started Merit Functional Foods in the middle of 2019 with a mission of improving consumers' perception of what plant-based foods should taste like. Today, more than ever, consumers are thinking more about their health and well-being. Consumers want to eat healthier, and they want to eat healthier than their parents' generation. Typically, they want to lead a healthier lifestyle. They care both about what they're putting in their mouth, but also where food comes from, as well as the ecological footprint associated with supply chains where their food comes from. Merit is delivering on these consumer needs by building the world's first pea and canola protein ingredient manufacturing facility right here in Winnipeg. With plans of being operational by the end of this year, only a short 8 weeks away. We're bringing to market some of the highest purity, highest quality, most functional, and best tasting plant protein ingredients. made it anywhere in the world. We're working with many large consumer goods companies around the world to bring our ingredients to life in their final packaged products. We're both helping them improve their existing products, but also create new innovative plant-based products that both mirror and beat meat-based alternatives and dairy alternatives and other products such as lifestyle nutrition products such as protein powders, nutrition and bars, for example. We believe COVID-19 has only heightened consumers' awareness of the need for healthier diets and healthier lifestyles, but also for healthier, more sustainable supply chains. The Good Foods Institute had done a recent report where they said 1 in 4 consumers are eating more plant-based foods now than before COVID. And plant-based is now outgrowing total food sales by over 14 times. We believe that consumers are speaking with their pocketbooks and they're wanting more and more healthier options. Merit's working hard to bring this to market in the form of new and tastier plant-based products that we all can thrive on as far as building our healthier lifestyles.
And thank you for that, Ryan. Now I'd like to turn to our panelists to answer specific questions about some of the things you had talked about. A question for Claudia. Claudia, when we were speaking last week, you told us a little bit about how we all of a sudden experienced the toilet paper shortage of 2020. What are sort of the lessons we learned about the shortages in the supply chain and the distributors' ability to ramp up that demand very quickly in a crisis? Is this going to make us more resilient in the future?
Yeah, it's a very good point, right? And I think what we experienced this year in terms of the impact on demand and supply was just extraordinary. I mean, anything from panic buys, this shift I was talking about from restaurant and service businesses to retail, the issues we had in meat processing, port closures, trade limitations. I mean, no supply chain is ever going to be fully prepared for that. I want to be clear, right? Because we want to keep supply chains lean. Otherwise, we create another whole bunch of food waste, which is not in the interest of sustainability. But what it's really needed is this transparency that sort of gives us insight about the product journey, from grass to glass, from farm to table, whatever you want to call it. But it's really about being able to make more agile decisions and understand sort of the cause and effect of those decisions. So if I need to reroute a product or if I need to make a change in the production. And this transparency is really not limited. I mean, we have this demand around food quality understanding. There's a lot of need for food safety, authenticity, to be able to understand if a product is ethical grown, where it comes from, if it has a sustainable footprint. So transparency is really key for all of those things. There are a couple of requirements from a technology perspective we really need to think about. One of them is just the trust in data sharing and the trust to work with suppliers and customers in creating this visibility, which is not natural to most organizations out there. I mean, only a couple of years ago, we would not let people walk out of a building and being afraid about trade secrets and losing trade secrets. Now we ask to have a joint ERP system with other organizations. So it's a huge move, but technology can enable that and guarantee that the need to have a third party that controls the data. So I think that's an important point. The other important point that we're really not trying to just trace product and sort of recreate the same thing that we've done before, but truly sort of establish something we call digital feedback loops, which means we can learn, we understand sort of the decisions we made, what effect those had, and then based on that, we create a learning system that helps us to improve processes in the future. And then lastly, there's sort of this big opportunity that comes with machine learning and sort of being able to monitor multiple data inputs at a time that truly help us to foresee trends and patterns that then sort of allow us to act more immediate and more agile. And, we can create those early warning systems that allow us to react much more faster than it would be possible in the past. And I just want to say, if you imagine food safety, if you would try to replicate what's done today and you just use it to see if a company went through their audits, it's a missed opportunity, because we can use machine learning to predict the risk of food safety throughout the value chain. And this is sort of what I mean with building out those learning systems that will be important in the future.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Now I wanted to turn to Ryan. Ryan, you talked a little bit about how you see value-added processing as an important part of our agricultural future. How do you think we can shift from a model of producing raw material for export to processing and developing innovative food products for the home, including plant-based proteins? What do we need to do to make it go more mainstream?
Yeah, appreciate that. I'm definitely speaking from the mindset of an entrepreneur. I'm now into my third business. I came actually from the animal protein industry, having worked with Maple Leaf Foods in my early career. Got into the hemp food industry in its infancy back in the early around 2010 actually, and helped scale a couple of businesses. One was Hemp Oil Canada here in Manitoba, another was Manitoba Harvest, if you're familiar with hemp hearts, and now into Merit Functional Foods. And I think really where I came from was understanding that there was an inherent need for a strong supply of call it very high premium quality plant proteins. As you can imagine, obviously right now, the plant-based food movement is growing exponentially. I think the market was about $5 billion in the US alone last year. As I mentioned earlier, growing, outpacing total food sales by almost 14 times. We as entrepreneurs saw the need, and I think that's where value adding really comes from, is initially from entrepreneurs. And I think big business gets into it after entrepreneurs kickstarts things. So, from my mindset, I think it really comes down to how do you develop the ecosystem for entrepreneurs to start, bring forward new ideas, unique and differentiated ideas to market. And I think here in Canada, I think we've definitely done a lot of very positive things that I'd love to highlight. First and foremost, obviously, there's a super cluster that's been funded by our federal government here called Protein Industry Canada, and it's been funded in such a way as to support both R&D as well as commercialization projects in the plant protein, to recognize that, hey, look, we as Canadians are great at exporting raw materials, whether it be canola, 20 million acres of canola seed grown here in Western Canada, or obviously peas is another area of our business. Over 4 to 5 million acres of peas are grown in Western Canada as well, right? All of these things are exported. 90% of peas are exported right now, and 50% of canola is exported as raw products. And I think it's an incumbent upon us as a country to recognize that there's significant opportunities for value adding these products, right? And I think that the Protein Industry Canada venture and partnership, whereby federal funds are being provided to entrepreneurs like ourselves to help commercialize new and innovative products like ours, is what's going to drive a new economy. Other programs available that people may or may not be aware about there is, Ag Canada has a great program called Agri Innovation Program, where they're willing to help fund through interest-free loans to help entrepreneurs start up, because oftentimes the highest cost of startup is capital, right? It's, in our industry, obviously, it's a very capital-intensive industry, and typically, as you're a startup or an entrepreneur, unfortunately, big banks aren't willing to necessarily fund startups, and I think that's where programs like the Agri Innovation Program or Protein Industry Canada or other programs like that really need to step up and support their entrepreneurs across Canada, start creating these new value chains, seizing on the opportunities before others in the world do so, right? So I think that's really where I see we can all step up, is support the entrepreneurs, and then entrepreneurs typically hand over their businesses to large, bigger businesses, which help grow them even further from there, right? So that's a little bit, maybe a little biased from my perspective, but that would be my feedback.
Thank you so much for that. Now I'd like to turn to Allison. Allison, what is the role of digital transformation for the future of agriculture? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, first off, I've got to say that I love being on a panel with Claudia because she basically sets everything up so well. And I think that the role of digital transformation is significant. Basically, my former company started out the world with a tagline in 1990 that was measure, monitor, predict, mitigate, and optimize. And with the advent of machine learning, we are now able to forecast what's coming down the pipe. We can basically respond in many different ways, and the role of traceability now becomes more of a proactive response. So I believe that technology is going to drive what happens in agriculture. It's going to really look at what we can do with climate change. And I think in that mind, we have to say that we have to agree that climate change is real and accelerating. The wildfires in California and Australia, hurricanes, extreme weather events are nightly news. My former company, alongside global researchers, many in Canada, developed a genetic selection method for improved feed efficiency in animals. This method reduced the cost of feed by as much as 15%, with a corresponding methane emission reduction by as much as 40%. Claudia made a really good point on waste. And all of us will need to consider how much we eat and how much we waste. But today, ag technology, such as no-till, zero emissions on machinery, improved fertilization, and using our soil to capture carbon to reduce emissions is available. Our next generation technologies, such as gene editing, microbiome technology, direct capture of methane from animals, and how we seed and harvest our crops, offer potential for a tri-tiered approach. Basically, we're going to improve farm profitability. We will enable greater sustainability, and these are our tools to combat climate change. I think we do require all of us, consumers, farmers, industry, supply chains, investors, and regulators to drive the impetus. Technology is going to take us there, but I guess you could say that it's basically all up to us.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Now I have a question that I hope some or all of the panelists can address. We have been reading a lot about hunger and food shortages as a result of this pandemic. What do you think are some of the problems that agricultural can solve or will need to solve in order to feed the billions of people in the coming decades? Why don't we start with Claudia for that one?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's a broad question, right? I mean, in general, I think it's really about being able to grow more food, produce less emission, use less land, less water, do everything with fewer people and in more uncertain conditions. How easy is that? No, I think those are really tough problems. I think the point, Allison made such a great overview of all the different technologies that are going to play an important role. So I'm not going to repeat that. I was really impressed. But what I want to say is, the kind of initiatives will be very different wherever you go. And, you look at countries like Canada or the US where you really have a more advanced, developed market. It's really about improving performance and making much more granular and precise decisions. Allison mentioned genomics information, inputs that's getting on crops, soil, farm practices, really understanding the correlation between everything we're doing on the farm will have a huge impact on the sustainable footprint and on productivity. And I think both is super important. Then you come to emerging markets, like you go to India or Africa, where like little information really goes a long way. We have a project in India by analyzing weather information, satellite and soil data, giving like 10 text messages to farmers where they were able to grow 30% more food. Those are like massive improvements that can be done in emerging markets. Then you go to Japan, where the average age of farmers is 67, or you go to New Zealand, where there's, and I'm sure in Canada as well, where it's really hard to find labor to help you with harvest, and certain crops cannot be grown in a country any longer. So there you really want to look for robotics and automation as being an important role. And, in other areas, it's about just being able, like in Singapore, to grow more food in your country state here. So the challenges are quite different. I want to say from a technology perspective, there's like a couple of areas that we really focus on. Is one, I said this in the beginning, is building out this data and analytics platform that is allowing others to build digital solutions on top. And I think that's important because otherwise everyone is always starting from scratch and reinventing the wheel and just doing simple things like bringing data into a format where you can run analytics. We are very much focused on bringing internet connectivity to farms because that's the way to participate in technology in the first place. We have a massive initiative around digital skills. So again, this is about can a farmer take advantage of technology? And then lastly, and I think one I'm really passionate about, is driving innovation around AI and machine learning as fast as possible with as many market participants as possible. So we have an initiative that's called AI for Earth that's addressing agriculture, biodiversity, water, and sustainability. And really the idea is to open source the development of all those novel AI models that are needed to address any kind of challenge, if it's a pest stress, disease recognition, smart irrigation, crop recognition in different regions. So having all of this innovation ready and be able to apply as quickly as possible where it's needed.
Thank you for that, Claudia. Allison, you spent a lot of time in many previous positions studying this. What are some of the lessons you learned about being able to feed a growing population?
Well, I think that, again, Claudia said it very well, and I would like to maybe make a comment out to Ryan in terms of alternative proteins are of great interest to me, as is everything regarding animal agriculture. I can't agree more strongly with Claudia in terms of machine learning. I think that applying artificial intelligence to everything we do and to big data in everything we do in agriculture is going to make a lot of sense. I'm very impressed by the fact that some of our technology can now transfer to smallholder farms. And I spent 3 years in Africa really looking at how could we deploy advanced technology. I think we're at a juncture now where we can. And I'm also very encouraged in Canada. Claudia mentioned the aging farmer population that we have. One of the things that I find amazing is that in the age group of about 35 to 50, women are starting to step up and be our farmers. Women are our farmers around the world. So I think that we need to scale up our population, really focus on digital skills, advancing digital skills in our farmers, investing in it. Ryan made a comment to that regard as well. We need to invest in our new technologies. We need to strengthen our innovators, because I think from our innovators, we are going to find our prosperity. So prosperity on the farm, especially in smallholder farm situations, is going to come from the investment we can make to really become a digital society.
Thanks, Claudia. Allison. Let me turn it over to Ryan now. Ryan, you've been working a lot with new types of foods. So how are they going to address the needs of a growing population?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I definitely agree with Allison. I think we are very ingenious people. I think in general, I think when challenged with feeding the world and doubling the amount of food available with the same arable land and water that's available today, I think we're very ingenious people, but in general, efficiencies can only take you so far, right? I think we need to think outside the box, and I think that the plant-based movement. I've come from the animal-based protein side, and kind of seen the light as it relates to plant-based. I think that if you're looking at beef protein as a great example, I'm not trying to pick on beef in particular, but it takes 20 times more land. And it produces 20 times more greenhouse gases per gram of protein than plant-based proteins. That alone is just a massive statistic, and we can't ignore it. I think the challenge comes down to is plant-based foods typically have had a strong perception and a rightful maybe perception of being just that, plant-based, and having some sort of off taste, off note, you name it, match the general population's perception of what meat should taste like or what dairy should taste like. I think that to me is where people's time and energy should be spent, and you can definitely see why. Is because it will solve a lot of problems for us. There's a big reason why all the biggest meat protein companies in North America are jumping on the plant-based bandwagon, whether it be Maple Leaf Foods, buying Light Life Foods, or Hormel or Tyson, or you name it. They're all jumping into the plant-based movement because they recognize that's the future. I think the challenge really comes down to is food formulators, food scientists need to better understand how to produce plant-based alternatives that better match their meat and dairy alternatives, brethren. And I'm not one for suggesting that there's not going to be meat in our diets in the future or dairy in our diets. I think there's a need for a balance, and I think there's a need for meat alternatives and dairy alternatives to be chosen by many, but also there's always going to be the individuals out there that choose to consume meat and dairy, so I think there's a need for both. But I think that, right now already dairy alternatives make up more than 10% of the dairy sales. And that was 0 15 years ago. Meat alternatives right now make up less than 1% of all meat sales. And I suggest that we're probably going to see that closer to 15 to 20% next short 5 to 10 years. So that alone will significantly impact our ability to feed the world and our ability to also maintain a very low environmental footprint.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's going to grow very rapidly, I guess. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the small farmer. I think a lot of us know about large farms working commodity crops, and that's sort of the image we have when you say farmer. But what is the profile of the small farmer today, and what resources does he or she need? Why don't we start with Claudia on that question?
Yeah, actually, I obviously will answer that on a perspective of technology. And, I actually think that one of the most important things with technology is the acceptance of technology to start with. And we were giving a couple of examples before that smallholder farmers can as much or even more participate and benefit from the insight that's coming from data and analytics. And I just want to pick on something that Allison said about women becoming farmers. One of the things we're seeing is just because some of those women are new to farming and they were passed out of this tribal knowledge that comes down from generation to generation, that there is an opportunity to relearn and do things differently. And that actually is leading to some really successful results and higher yields in some cases than with traditional methods. So I think there's an opportunity to do things in a different way. I think the most important piece here, though, is when you think about technology, technology really lives and breathes off massive amounts of data. And, I always say, and apologize if this is unpleasant news, but even if you're a large farmer and you put a lot of technology on your farm, you will get value, but you will get limited value unless you start looking and comparing beyond your own farm. So what I truly think is we need to be able to create those learning systems. That's how I like to call it, where it's based on aggregation of data. And I absolutely think that both commercial and public and NGO and the research organizations in the world all need to play in a super important role to help with that. And then also to build out those systems that farmers can trust and apply for their own farms. I truly also think that the current reward system, where pretty much the whole risk lays on the farmer's shoulders, is something that needs to change. And you will see more things like outcome-based services coming to the market, or insurances and banks providing new support programs to farmers. And I think that's really, truly a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Claudia. Allison, what have you sort of learned of the profile of the small farmer today, and what resources all of them need?
I think that a small farmer, one of the things that I would say about animal agriculture is smallholder farmers are generally they use animals as a way to actually feed their families. Smallholder farms have limited access to land, technology, markets, and I think that we can improve those kind of access points through technology. The other aspect that I think that we should really look at is animals are upcyclers. They're probably our best upcyclers. They can take land that we can't produce anything else on, and they can convert byproducts. They can convert poor land into protein. So they do have a value, especially in the developing world. And again, back to the point made by both Claudia and I earlier, is that women represent about 43% of ag labor. If we can improve their access to land, technology, and markets, I think that we can actually improve the way that we feed the world. And so smallholder farmers have a large part to play within our ecosystem and within the world.
Thanks so much. I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit over to climate change. We've heard a lot about sometimes large farms and large farmers sort of resisting climate change, and sometimes there's some conflict there. But there's already a lot being done. So I was wondering what you have seen is being done in the sector to combat climate change, and what more do you think can be done by companies and policy leaders to address this? Why don't we start with Ryan for that?
Sure. I think it really comes down to consumers. I think regardless of where you are in the supply chain, I think will drive all things. And I think more and more nowadays consumers care about what they're buying, and they're using their pocketbook to dictate what works and what doesn't work for them from a supply chain perspective. My last business that I was in was a hemp food business. We had both. We did everything from working with growers and contracting growers in Western Canada to grow hemp seed for us, and it was over 20,000 acres in some cases, some years. Sometimes larger than that, but we took the food product right to final package products. We recognized that our consumers cared enough about how not only what they were buying as far as nutrition, how it tasted, but also understanding more about supply chain. And in our case, obviously, we had that supply chain. It was local. It was a North American supply chain. It wasn't bringing in seed and product from China or Europe to feed North America. It was based in Western Canada. We believed in the triple bottom line approach. We weren't just concerned about profit, but also people and planet as well. And as a result, we were B Corp certified as a company. I think that's important for all companies to care about, and there's a need to care not only about profit, but their people and their network and their the communities in which they live and work in, but also the planet. In our case, we were able to recognize that. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. We all know those simple terms. We started measuring our basic carbon footprint, and we were actually the very first. I know Maple Leaf Foods loves to market the fact that they were carbon neutral as the first large company. We're actually the first food company in North America at Manitoba Harvest to be carbon neutral. This is probably 4 or 5 years ago now. So. We believed in measuring, we believed in managing, we believed in putting in place projects to reduce our footprint. Going forward, I think there's a need for incentivization. I think there's a need for incentivizing businesses to do the right thing, because ultimately, what's good for someone's pocketbook will typically be what someone would adhere to. We're in the middle right now building a 100,000 square foot food facility here in Winnipeg. As I mentioned earlier, nearly completing it. Over $150 million project costs, so very, very capital intensive to get into plant protein ingredient space. As we develop this facility and as we develop the engineering for the facility, we thought about our carbon footprints. Basic things like looking at if you're putting in place any type of natural gas burners, putting in place heat exchangers to reuse airflow before you obviously cycle back outside and bring in fresh air. In our case, in our wet extraction process, we're using the actual heat from the product streams to heat up other products. So rather than simply using chilled water or steam, we're actually using heat exchangers on product heat exchangers. Very innovative and unique and differentiated things from electricity perspective, putting in place variable frequency drives, you name it, in terms of electrical systems to make sure that as you're managing your, in our case, thousands of horsepower worth of motors within this facility, we're managing them in a very efficient manner. So, I'm very happy to say that, we set up intentionally here in Manitoba. Manitoba has by far one of the lowest greenhouse gas footprints per unit of power produced, thanks to the hydroelectric power system in Manitoba. And we are on a path at Merit Functional Foods to also be carbon neutral within our first year of production. So it's a story that I think consumers care about. And it's also a story more and more brands care about and want, in our case, as an ingredient that's formulated into the various brands. They care about what they're purchasing and what they're putting, more and more so nowadays, what they're putting into their food products, which is great.
Thanks, Ryan. Let me turn the question over to you, Claudia. What do you see as being done to address climate change, and what more can policy leaders think about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one, I just want to say I completely agree with Ryan that it's ultimately the consumer who's going to make the call. I think it's a very, very important statement. And I go back to what I said before. I think there needs to be transparency about the product journey and the sustainable footprint. What I'm seeing is just there's such a massive distrust that what we're seeing as data is true or not. And I mean, I feel with Ryan, I am a vegan. And I think a lot of, you get in this debate, how much is it really and how can I trust this data? I think we need to step away. People are conservative and distrust for a reason, because a lot of the insight we're getting from farms, like emissions, water usage, other programs are done on or coming from calculations or research farms, but are not measured in the real world. And I think there is some improvement that needs to be done. I think the other big point is really about not a single company alone or a single organization is going to be able to solve that. We, as Microsoft, we have committed to spend $1 billion over the next 4 years to build out new technologies and innovative sustainability solutions, and we'll do it with our partners. We know it's not going to, this improvement is not going to come alone to look at our own production facilities and so on. Now, the important point how we're spending this is, one, really working with the government and regulations to align on how things can be measured. We're part of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, where we work with other organizations to come to the same standards. And then sort of the next piece is, how can we use technology to monitor that consistently? So again, not only on one farm, but have consistent control and understand farm practices, tillage, no tillage. I mean, there's so many ways to look into monitoring sustainable footprint, prevent runoff of nitrogen and a lot of different things, but use technology to help monitor that, and then sort of make it possible to really work with this information and create new things like carbon markets and things that hopefully are coming in the next couple of years. But the bigger point here is it's only going to work if we work cross companies and government boundaries here.
Thanks for that. Allison, how do you see climate change being addressed, and what are some of the innovative things you see being done?
I think that we've addressed a number of the solutions, perhaps. But it excites me that agriculture, it contributes to climate change, but there's the greatest opportunity to make change. And that is in the way we produce our food, the way we ship our food, down to as consumers, as both Claudia and Ryan have said, as consumers, we can make some choices. I see the greatest strength perhaps in genomic technologies, as I spoke to, but also a conservation mindset. And I am so encouraged that now millennials make up the biggest part of our population. They're thinking about our society. They're thinking about the directions that we take. I'm also really, really pleased to see a focus on equality, diversity, and inclusion coming into our corporate speak. And I think that we really mean setting governance and standards for ESG. And so as corporations, I think we're getting to be, we're having a greater empathy, not only for each other through COVID, but maybe a greater empathy for our environment. And we are living in a global world. And I think that respecting that, we are changing the tide. And maybe it took COVID to get us to this point where we're all communally thinking, but I truly believe that that is happening.
Great. I just have one more question for the panel. If you have a question from the audience, please type it into the platform and we will get to it towards the end. My question is sort of what are some of the opportunities that are in agriculture, whether it's in Agri-Canada or among our neighbors, do you think our audience should know more about? How are they sort of positioning themselves to drive recovery post-pandemic? Why don't we start with Ryan on that one?
Yeah, I think there's tons of innovation happening. As I mentioned earlier, the protein innovation supercluster, which is funded here in Canada, is highlighting all sorts of new technologies, whether it be looking at extracting protein from fava beans, chickpeas, lentils. In our case, obviously, we're going to be the first in the world to be producing canola protein. And interestingly enough, canola is Canada's largest crop, over 20 million acres grown. 50% of the canola that's grown here in Canada is processed in the form of canola oil in oil extraction facilities across Canada. What's interesting about that is that the majority of that, obviously, that canola is grown for the purposes of selling oil. And the co-product or byproduct becomes the canola meal or spent canola meal, which is fed then to large animals. We're actually turning that paradigm on its tail and actually looking at canola in a completely different way. We're bringing in the canola seed ourselves. We're cold pressing the canola seed. Unfortunately, if you take it through those existing expeller presses and those existing oil extraction facilities across Canada, the protein itself is denatured because the extraction process happens over 100 degrees Celsius. We need to maintain the protein, so therefore need to maintain less than 60 degrees Celsius. So we're actually going to be doing our own expeller pressing, cold pressing in our facility, and then taking the meal, so the oil becomes our byproduct in this case, whereas it's the main product in the existing industry, and then we take the cake itself and extract the protein from that. So it's completely new innovation. It's completely new technology, and it's creating even more value-added product from an existing crop that's already growing in Canada in significant quantities. So, we believe the future obviously is very, very bright for canola and for canola growers, and that's a great thing for Canada. albeit we're starting small. We're going to be, maybe having a production capacity of about 30,000 acres worth of canola. So not quite a big dent into the 20 million acres, but you have to start somewhere. We are going to be creating a market for canola protein to be placed into a lot of different food ingredients. So think of your meat alternatives brands out there. We're hoping, obviously, canola protein will make its way into the formula in the next months to 16 months. And from there, we think that there's a very bright future. So, maybe it's like I said earlier, maybe it's in fava beans, lentil beans, lentils, chickpeas. There's all sorts of new opportunities with these new legumes, but there's also opportunity for existing crops such as canola, which we're in the middle of developing this new to world protein source. So the future is bright, and I think with innovation, we will definitely be feeding the world for many, many more years.
Thanks for that. We only have a little bit of time left, but maybe Claudia and Allison can each give their 1 minute answer to the question of what are some of the opportunities our audience should know about, especially to drive Canada's economic recovery. Allison, why don't we go to you?
Sure. This is the part of the world that I love. It gets me up every day. The new technologies that are coming about, controlled environment farming, autonomous farm vehicles, public-private partnerships, water resource use efficiency, runoff management, repurposing, and circular waste kind of systems. Just are very exciting. Bioenergy and waste, automation. Automation is probably the area that we can go best on. But we've covered a lot of territory in this discussion. It's been just absolutely incredible, and love to hear what Claudia has to say.
Well, thank you. I mean, there's so much. Yeah, thank you. And there's so much said by Allison and Ryan, so not lots to add. The one thing we haven't talked as much about is just we're heading into this new generation where it's about personalization, personal experience, more personalized product, more customized experience, personalized diets, which I think is fantastic because I think we'll get this understanding what's really good for human health, for our nutrition, for the environment. So I think it's a fantastic time to come. I think the big point here is we need to be able to see everything, the correlation between human pests, plants, animals in the world to see what our improvements are going to do for the whole environment. And for that, big data, AI, machine learning are really the tools to work with. And I'm like all excited about what's up to come and what we'll be able to accomplish with technology.
Great. Thank you so much for all that. We had such wonderful discussion with everybody on the panel, and I hope the audience found it engaging. And now I'd like to turn it over to the host of the Toronto Global Forum.